I happen to love games about construction, about building things, about putting together a city or a town or a castle or whatever. I love that kind of thing. So if the title of a game has the word town in it, I'm immediately going to perk up and check this game out. So let's look at Tiny Towns. In Tiny Towns, the players are constructing a small town consisting of 7 different types of buildings, using whatever resources they can muster. On a player's turn, they call out one of the 5 different resources. Each player then takes that resource and places it in any plot in their lands. The goal of placing these resources is to match the patterns of varying resources shown on the building cards. Once you've matched a pattern on your lands, you can remove all of those resources and place the corresponding building in any one of those spaces in the pattern. There are 7 different types of buildings, and most of them have 4 different variants of that building with different uses, most often a victory point scoring method. Cottages are always worth 3 points as long as they're fed by a farm. Farms and their variations will always feed your cottages. Wells, chapels, taverns, and theaters and their variants will give you unique scoring criteria. And factories and its variants will provide abilities that help you build easier. Also, at setup, you're dealt a monument card. This is a special building that only you can build and will give you a special ability unique to you. Once your lands are completely full of resources and buildings and you can't build anything new, your game is over. And when all the players have finished the game, you score points for all of your buildings, and the player with the most points is the winner. So after that super quick overview, you're probably thinking this is a very, very light game. Well, you would both be right and wrong. Because from a complexity standpoint, this thing is super simple. You could teach this game in 2 minutes flat to just about anybody out there, and they're going to get it and be up and running and playing. But this game is actually extremely thinky. There's a lot of math. Now, not super deep math, but there's a lot of math and spatial relations that you have to deal with, and you can't be thinking in the moment how you're going to build your city. You almost have to have a city plan in advance, like thinking about, okay, based on the building cards that are out, because there's a bunch of them, you can randomly put them out there that always change the way that victory points are scored. You have to look at those things and think ahead, where am I going to try to put these buildings? What strategies am I going to go for? You're going to have to think ahead, all the different combos you can put together and how you're going to try to build your town. And that is such a pleasure, man, because this is one of those games where you could play it just kind of frivolous and willy-nilly, because everybody is around the table calling out resources. So there is kind of randomness, even though it's player-controlled randomness. You don't know what they're going to pick unless you're paying really close attention to what they're doing. You could probably predict, but if somebody's playing sort of willy-nilly, it's going to be kind of random. And so you have to deal with that kind of stuff. But if your whole group is playing just kind of willy-nilly about it, it's still kind of fun and you don't have to think too hard. But you could really get deep in the weeds of thinking about the perfect way to put this thing together and then dealing with the resources that your opponents are making you place. And that's the cool thing about this game. There's a serious level of indirect player interaction going on here because you should be watching the other players and their boards. You can clearly see the patterns that they're building on their board based on what's out, what they're trying to do, and they can see what you're trying to do. So you can kind of predict what the resources they're going to call, and you can kind of alter your plan to sort of figure for that. And many times they're going to give you stuff that you can't use, and you're going to have to find a place for it in your little land and try to find a way to use it in the future. Work that stuff into your plan. That indirect player interaction is really a strong element to this game. It gives you such a pleasure to try to work a strategy, alter that strategy, and have it evolve as the game progresses. And going back to that kind of thinky, mathy concept of this game, you can literally, in the book, it actually warns you that you can score negative points in this game. And I've seen it happen because you just got screwed because other players are just calling out the resources that you don't need, and if that starts to happen, you need to alter your plans so that you can use them. Man, like there's a lot of thinking that goes on in this game if you take it seriously. Now, talking about all those different buildings, I think there's a ton of replayability in this game because there's 4 cards for each one of those buildings, with the exception of the cottage. They're always the same. But, the taverns, the chapel, the factories, they're all different. The factory could be a bank one day. The chapel could be a bakery another time. But like they're all use the same meeple, right? Having all of those different styles of victory point conditions or spatial relations oriented victory point conditions really makes for some really neat combos. You have to kind of study those up front and see which ones that you're going to use. And that adds such a replayability to this game because it's kind of different every single time that you play it. That's really neat. And all those monuments that you get, there's a ton of those as well. So you could get a completely different one every time that only you get to use. It can also alter your strategy in some capacity, building that monument. Neat game. I really dig this concept. Now, I will say that one thing that is a little knock against it is that player count significantly changes this game. If you play with a lot of players, there's a little more randomness again, because you can't control what resources they're going to call, right? So around the table, people are calling out stuff. If there's 5 players, that's 4 resources that you didn't specifically ask for. But if it's a 2-player game, it's going back and forth, right? So you have a lot more control. So the higher player counts can get a little more chaotic. So there's a lot more to pay attention to in the game. Now, there is a variant in the game where there's a deck of cards where you draw a card and that's the resource you need to place. It's kind of like Kingdom Builder, right? Like where you're forced to place a certain resource and you got to deal with the randomness of the card. So that can kind of help. So everybody's kind of dealing with the same the same spread of cards that are being drawn. I don't really like that concept. I like the picking. I like being able to select, and I like to watch everybody else select and kind of predict what they're going to select and alter my strategy based on that. But I think that higher player counts, it gets a little bit wonky. A 3 and 4 felt good, but 5, I wouldn't go anywhere around that. Another thing that could be a knock against it, but for me, I kind of decided that it isn't, is that some cards are clearly better than other cards in some instances of the game. Like particularly with the starting setup, I felt like there were cards that were just way more powerful than this other card. So there was no reason to do this other card. But as you start to play more and more and you see combos of the more advanced kinds of cards, it's more about the combos than the individual cards. And that's kind of neat, right? So I think that it's fun to try and locate the good combo and the crappy combos, as opposed to it's clearly you can look at the cards and see this one's better than that one. So as it gets a little more advanced with the other cards, it gets better. So I don't have a problem with that. Really, I got nothing bad to say about this game. It's well done. It's a fun game. I think I'm going to get a ton of play out of this game because of the replayability, because of the cool comboing, because of the fact that it's so easy I can teach anybody, and the fact that it's a very thinky game on top of that. My family loved it. They asked for me to bring it back. So this is going into my family bag that's going every time I go. I'm very happy with Tiny Towns. Really, really good game.
Thanks so much, everybody. If you've enjoyed this video, please do us a giant favor by subscribing to the channel and clicking that wacky bell icon. If you're into board games, miniatures games, role-playing games, we have a bunch of audio podcasts you might enjoy. You can find those at thesecretcabal.com or on iTunes and Stitcher.